I've had some time now to mess around with both the Xbox Series S and Series X, and in the time that I've been able to play with both these systems, I actually have found myself slightly changing my opinion on whether or not you should buy which version of the system. When the Series S was first revealed, I very much had this reaction of, oh, this is the obvious choice for a lot of people out there. It's so much cheaper, it's still offering very similar performance for a lot of games outside of resolution. This is really the way a lot of people should go. But now that I've had more time with both of them, I'm kind of tilting a little bit away from that. But let's break down what's different about these two systems and why I think that. So the first thing I want to take a look at is the physical design differences between these two systems and how ultimately I think this is one of the main areas where the Series S pulls out a major win. Not just in terms of visuals, I think that is a little bit more of a subjective thing. Some people are going to really like the black monolithic tower look of the Series X, other people are going to like the color clashing and smaller design of the Series S, which is the camp I fall under. I think this is a better looking system as far as the two go, especially because I like having my system sideways where this definitely looks better. However, there are also some very functional reasons why the Series S is a better choice for some people. And this really comes down to a combination of not necessarily just the fact that the system is smaller, but also how it is smaller and where the vent placement for the system is. If you currently own an Xbox One S or One X and you're thinking of upgrading to an Xbox Series system, the S is going to be able to very easily slot in and out of wherever you currently have your Xbox One set up. Because again, this is the smallest Xbox system ever made, and the placement of the vent allows it to be in a sideways fashion and have plenty of room to breathe. And if you like the idea of having the Series S in tower mode, well, what's really interesting about it is that one way you can have it set up is that instead of having the, Xbox logo facing forward with an USB-A available, you can instead have the vent forward, which is how they've really shown it in a lot of promotional images. And what's cool about that is that, well, no matter what kind of setup you have, the front is normally the least obstructed area because you can see the system clearly, and so that's giving the vent a nice place to exit all that heat. By comparison, the Series X is something that I found myself actually needing to double check and think about every now and then with how I want to set it up. Not just because it's a larger system, but because of how it is larger and where the vent is placed, specifically on the top of the tower or on the far side if you have it laying sideways. The fact of the matter is that if you rely on any kind of traditional TV console setup, if you're using a, let's call them cubbies, I guess, a little slot to place your console down, there's a good chance that unless it's a very large cubby space, you're going to end up blocking the vent on the system in one form or another. If not necessarily having it right up against a solid wall, not having nearly as much space as I think it should be given in order to make sure it breathes. Now, this isn't that hard of a problem to fix. You just put it on the top shelf. You put it on somewhere where it's not going to be obstructed. It's not that large of a deal, but at the end of the day, that does somewhat restrict and limit how it can be incorporated into a setup versus the Series S, which very easily sets itself up into basically anything. Now, the big marketing push for the Series S is that in concept, it should offer the same kind of performance as the Series X, with the specific exception of not doing 4K gameplay. Games should be running at the same or very similar frame rates. They should be having the same graphical effects. It's just whether or not you want 4K support. Now, for some of you out there, the debate between 4K and 1080p is a pretty easy one. You may have already had a 4K console and you don't want to go back, or you have a 4K TV and you know you want to take full advantage of it. That's great. But there are a lot of people who never used a 0.5 system and are wondering how noticeable the difference is. And the honest truth is, honestly, I think it's a little overhyped. Yes, there is a clear difference between 4K and 1080p visuals. However, depending on not only the quality of your TV, but the size of your TV and how far away you sit from it, you might not be able to fully appreciate these differences. There's actually a lot of great charts and studies you can find out there that show the kind of optimal distance to sit from a television based on the resolution and size of your screen. And if you happen to have a very large TV that you don't sit that very far away from, then yes, a 4K system is going to look leagues better than what you're seeing on a 1080p screen. However, for a lot of people, if you're working with a smaller screen or you're sitting very far away from it, in a lot of cases, what your eyes are capable of perceiving in a 1080p image versus a 4K image isn't quite what a lot of people make it out to be. Again, this isn't to say that 4K isn't better than 1080p. It is. It does have a crisper image, and with the right setup, you can absolutely take advantage of this. I merely want to point out that for some people, especially depending on what kind of TV setup you have, you might not necessarily find it worth spending the extra $200 to get 4K performance, when at the end of the day, 1080 is going to look very similar to you. Now, of course, this also hinges on the concept of these systems being identical outside of that difference in resolution, when it turns out, well, not entirely. The situation's a little more complex than that. I think when it comes to first-party games from Microsoft, absolutely that is a mandate they are trying to maintain, that performance-wise, these two systems should be the same. And in my own personal experience, that has been how a lot of it has worked out. I have tried out different games on both the Series S and Series X, Forza Horizon 4, Gears 5, Gears Tactics, and ultimately the experience did feel and look very much the same aside from the difference in resolution. However, we do already know for a fact that there are games coming from third-party companies which are going to have graphical effects supported on one version of the system and not the other. A large example of this being Devil May Cry 5 Special Edition will support ray tracing on the Series X and not on the Series S. So what does this ultimately mean? Well, if you buy a Series S, games at the end of the day should still perform just as smoothly and cleanly as they do on a Series X while being at that lower resolution. But when it comes to third-party companies, there might be the occasional sacrifice of certain visual options in order to make sure that games run smoothly, and it's not going to be maintained across both versions of the system. So if you absolutely always want to have the best-looking version of a game, not just in terms of resolution, but graphical effects, well, it looks like you might have to go out of your way to make sure you grab a Series X in order to get that kind of performance. It's also worth noting that as far as being used as a multimedia device goes, the Series S offers everything the Series X does. They both support 4K playback for media, they both support HDR, they both support Dolby Vision. As far as using these as multimedia systems go, not just talking about gaming specifically, ultimately they are going to offer you the same thing there. So if you care about 4K content for movies and film, but not necessarily for gaming, the Series S is going to still get that for you. And as for the debate of disc versus discless, this is honestly a pretty straightforward and easy one. If you're upgrading from a previous system and you own physical discs, absolutely you should be looking at a Series X because you want to keep using those. If you're getting a next-gen system for the first time, honestly, Xbox has really made the heaviest push for good arguments of why you should just go all digital, primarily thanks to Game Pass. But if you do like the idea of owning physical discs, whether because you like the option of returning it, borrowing it with friends, whatever, then yeah, pretty easy decision for you. The real trade-off to me that has been a bit of a surprise once actually using these systems is the storage space. Now, going into the release of these systems, we already knew that there was a difference in SSD space between these. The Series S offering a 512GB SSD, whereas the Series X is offering a full terabyte. However, that's not actually the full usable space you get. There's always going to be some part of the SSD that's going to be taken up by the system's OS and other features. And so once that's included, it's not really 512 versus 1 terabyte, it's really 364 versus 802. And the fact of the matter is that as we get into next-gen gaming and games are getting larger and larger, 364 is not a ton of usable space. It's enough. You can certainly install a few games on it, but especially if you're looking to play major AAA titles, that is going to fill up very, very quickly. Now, part of the hope for what would help balance this out is that because the Series S is a 1080p console, not a 4K one, games aren't going to require 4K textures and therefore are going to be smaller on the Series S, which is true, but the difference in size honestly is not appreciable enough to really balance out the difference in storage capacities. A good example of this is Forza Horizon 4. Now, this is an Xbox One game that is getting a Series X and Series S optimized version, and when installed on these two systems, it ended up taking up 85.5 gigabytes. On the Series S, a quarter of the full storage space available for the system, whereas on the Xbox Series X, it was taking up 96.4 gigabytes, basically only 11 gigabytes more. What this means is that if you're looking to play a lot of bigger name AAA games, you're going to fill up the space on a Series S very, very quickly. Now, there are a couple ways that you can alleviate the situation. One, you could constantly delete and reinstall games as you need them, which is a hassle, but works. The other option is to expand your storage. Now, when it comes to expanding memory on the Series S, at least when it comes to playing next-gen specific games, the only option right now is buying the proprietary Xbox card coming from Seagate, which offers an additional terabyte of storage, which is a major upgrade. at the cost of $220, which just so happens to be larger than the price difference between a Series S and Series X. Now, this does get you, in total, way more storage space in general, but there's definitely that kind of feeling of you're more likely needing to buy that expansion for a Series S versus when you have that 800 gigs available on a Series X, which, again, yeah, you'll probably eventually fill up if you're buying a lot of big-name games, but not nearly as quickly, and you're probably not needing to juggle them around nearly quite as much by uninstalling and reinstalling titles. So, where does that leave my final thoughts on this whole debate between Series S and Series X? I still think that at that lower price point, even with the smaller SSD space available, the Series S is a great sort of introductory Xbox console. If you don't own any gaming console right now and you just want to pick something up to kind of get into gaming, get your feet wet, this is a great choice. It's much more affordable, it's easy to set up, and ultimately you can try out a lot of different games quickly thanks to Game Pass. I also think it's a great choice if you're planning on picking up multiple systems. For instance, let's say you want to own both a PlayStation and Xbox. This is a cheaper way of having access to both ecosystems while still being able to play majority games on PlayStation if you prefer, and having this as your go-to system for using Game Pass or for playing Xbox exclusive titles. However, if you're planning on only buying one system right now for this holiday season and your eyes are set on Xbox, the Series X is just honestly, I think, the better way to go. Yes, you're spending $200 extra, but you're getting 4K, you're getting support for physical discs, and most importantly, you're getting enough initial space to support buying lots and lots of games for it. Again, I don't think the Series S is necessarily a bad investment. I think it's a great pickup if you're looking to save money. But ultimately, if you're planning on buying and playing a lot of games, Series X is just worth spending the extra $200 for, because at the end of the day, you're probably going to end up doing that with the Series S anyways to buy a memory card. Whereas the Series X, yeah, you might have to buy the memory card eventually, but it's a lot easier to stop yourself from getting to that point.